to this series, which is very inspiring and very, I think it's a great honor to be in it. My topic will resonate a lot with previous talks, especially the talks of Stephen Rittenstein, of Pablo Benedetto and Paolo Rizzi. In a way, we will see a lot of things that have been already discussed by them from the perspective of perplexity. So we will talk about the very notion of perplexity, of Hayra in Ibn Arabi, its centrality, which is the topic of my PhD research. And I will share with you some of the findings regarding metaphysics, ontology, and epistemology, and more precisely what is related to the notions of relation, nisba, and Thubut. And so it's my PhD research work in progress, even if it's already the end of my research. But I will be very happy to have your feedbacks and comments on this. So let's start right in Hayra and in the importance of the notion in Ibn Arabi. I will try to be as fast as I can in this, because I think that most of you are already acquainted with that notion, but to have a few few reminders. For example, the third Aqidah in the prolegomena of the Futuhat begins by Alhamdulillah Muhayyir al-Uqul. So glory to God, the one who makes the intellects perplexed. And somewhere else we can find very straightforward affirmations like the most perfect one is the one whose perplexity is the more immense. So basically what I try to show in my PhD research is that Hayra is not just a vague notion for Ibn Arabi. It's not only a notion that would point to a limit of knowledge or something, but it's a precise epistemological, even metaphysical and cosmological notion. It talks clearly about ilm al-Hayra. We will see this further on, and also of maqam al-Hayra, which are the two sides of the same approach. And the notion of Hayra, at least only in the Futuhat, but also in the Fusus al-Hikam and a lot of treatises, it has multiple implications in Quranic hermeneutics, also about the Insan al-Kamil, who is described as wearing the mantle of Hayra and being precisely beginning as Insan Kamil, as the Caliph, when God puts on his shoulders the mantle of Hayra. It has even cosmological implication with the notion of Hijab al-Izza or Falak al-Atlas, but we will not talk about this here. Just to summarize it, as he states it in the Futuhat, the knowledge of God is perplexity, and the knowledge of creation is perplexity. So we have perplexity all around. So just a quick reminder of the notion of Hayra before Ibn Arabi, because I think it's important to point, because he clearly dialogues with those notions. So in the Quran, it is a hapax, which is clearly negative in that verse, describing those who are deluded by the demons on earth and are made perplexed by the demons. That very negative notion of confusion actually comes from the very definition of the word, which is, interestingly enough, is related to the fact of mixing different liquids in a vessel. The ha'ir is a vessel in which you mix liquids, and then you cannot distinguish between the liquids. So this idea of confusion is really much used by the Mu'tazila against the tenets of the anthropomorphist thesis, also by the philosophers, confusion, so Hayra as opposed to clear reasoning, and the most famous example is Maimonides' famous book, Kitab Dalalat al-Ha'irin, so the guide of the perplexed. But we have a more neutral use, for example, in the Ikhwan al-Safa, where Hayra points to the bewilderment caused by the complexity of the world, like a contemplation of the inner complexity of creation. And then in early Sufi sources, a clear use of Hayra as the spiritual knowledge by excellence, the immediate intuition of the Gnostic. And you find this in a lot of early Sufi sources. I find it more and more as I read early Sufi sources in Tustari, in Junaid, Sarraj, Kalabadi. But recently I also found that in the Kitab Awarif al-Ma'arif of Omar Sohrawardi, the end of the book actually also close on Hayra. So it's a very, I would not say common, but central notion in early Sufi sources. And clearly Ibn Arabi draws a lot from this Sufi use of Hayra, and is entering in almost a polemical dialogue with the other use of the notion. So in Ibn Arabi, in order to understand Hayra, perplexity, we need to understand its correlative, its correlation with knowledge. Actually, he always quotes a hadith in which the prophet make a prayer and ask to God, my Lord, increase me in perplexity about you, Rabbi zidni fika tahayyuran, which is clearly an allusion and kind of answer to the famous Quranic verse, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. So here we have an example in the chapter 50 of the Futuhat, dedicated to the people of Hayra, actually, so the people of perplexity, in which Ibn Arabi says, whenever the real increases the perfected in knowledge, this knowledge increases him in perplexity. The people of perplexity are immensely more perplexed than the proponents of examination of the rational proofs without comparison. Their perplexity, which comes from the variation of the theophanies, is more intense than the perplexity coming from the examination of the contradictory indications about him. So here we have an important indication, is that Hayra is clearly linked with the notion of coincidentia oppositorum, with the perspective of the reunion of the opposites. And a very interesting statement of Al-Kharraz, usually very often recalled by Ibn Arabi and other Sufis, but here there is a precision which dives us directly into Hayra. He says that Al-Kharraz said, I knew God through his reunion of the opposites. And when he heard this from us, our companion Tajuddin al-Ikhlati said, no, actually he is the opposites themselves, and he was right. So now that we saw the basics of perplexity in Ibn Arabi, that idea of coincidentia oppositorum, that idea of like supra-rational perception, let's see how it can help us to apprehend Wujūd, to apprehend being. What is very important to start from is that in Ibn Arabi, Wujūd has a double meaning. He clearly inherits what I call the Junaidian, which is the Sufi use of the term Wujūd, which is Wujūd as a finding, as an experience of being, and even as a way of being, and as an ethic, and so a kind of spiritual epistemology. But also, he clearly addresses the Kindian, Farabian, or Avicennian, the philosophical being, and all the discussions on being a substance or an accident or an entity, like Ibn Arabi calls it, and which is the ontological discourse. So Wujūd for Ibn Arabi has clearly an epistemological and ontological aspect, and it is summarized in in a statement like this famous one, the real is identical to being. So we can say that Wujūd, being, is what there is. It's the only universal, it's the absolute existence. And here absolute as meaning indefinite and not as definite by absoluteness. And we will come back to this very important precision and subtlety. And it's also what is there. So it's the Wujūd as particulars, as relative existence, relative here as meaning relational. We'll talk about relations, which are the mental universals and particulars. But what is even more important is that because of that epistemological and ontological aspect, Wujūd is not only an object of knowledge, it is also the subject of knowledge. So Wujūd is the objective natural universal, it's being, and all the rest are mental rational universals and particulars. But Wujūd is also the subjective experiential universal, meaning the conditions of the finding, and the rest is what is found actually without distinction. So we see that Wujūd transcends the object-subject dichotomy. Wujūd is both an object as being experienced and a subject as being experiencing. And so Wujūd is ultimately to be found in a dialectical movement between subject and object. And this is, of course, very famously symbolized in the notion of Ayn. The Ayn being the entity, the object that we are talking about, but it's also the eye observing it. And Ibn Arabi, of course, plays a lot with the ambivalence of the word, as Pablo Benito showed us in his talk. Here is a beautiful passage from the Futuhat in which that subject-object dichotomy is made to play, I would say. I say to him, you, and he says to me, you. I say to him then, me. He says to me, no, actually, me. Then I say to him, but how is that? And he says, just as you saw. So I say to him, but I did not see anything but the perplexity. There is no attainment from my side and no connection from yours. So he says, actually, I just connected you. Then I say, but I have nothing at my disposal. And he says, and that is what connected you. So here we see the implications of the subject-object dichotomy and that dialectical movement between the two in order to grasp or to experience, to apprehend Wujūd, being, and the very importance of that relational dialectics and the role played by perplexity in it. So as he states, what is real is being, and the error is perplexity in the relation. And another statement from the Fusus al-Hikam, the being of multiplicities in the names, which are the relations, and these are non-existent things. So here we come again at the famous and ever ongoing discussion of metaphysics and ontology between being and non-being. And we say that we see here how perplexity plays a role in articulating those notions, the notion of relation, and that being in error is actually having a wrong apprehension and comprehension of the relations. So if we want to summarize a bit what we just saw, we see that we enter a clear circular epistemologic path, which is the epistemology of perplexity, the knowledge by perplexity, as I call it, in allusion to the famous knowledge by presence. The real Wujūd is one, is absolute, and absolute as transcending even the category of absoluteness. Error is the perplexity when we apprehend or try to understand the relations, which are the Wujūd as relative and many, and being many. So actually every aspect points to the other one. Being points to non-being, the one and the many always are always in dialogue. What there is as subject calls and points to the object, to what is there. The conditions of experiencing being points to the things experienced, and ultimately knowledge and perplexity are entering in a circle, and the two du'as of Ibn Arabi, of the prophet, enters in dialogue. So, like he says, there is a perplexity from which the servant escapes, and from which he can escape, and there is a perplexity from which he cannot escape. And that is the science of perplexity, from which the one who enters it cannot escape. So here we clearly see that that dialectical movement between the subject and the object does not call to an end, actually. And this is what we will see clearly stated in two very interesting passages, one of the Fusus al-Hikam and one of the Futuhat, that I think we should read together. And it's one has been already addressed by Stephen in his previous talk, so I will pass on it more quickly. But I think it's very interesting to read this passage coming from the face of Nuh and the circular path of perplexity, in order to apprehend the circle of being and what he tells us about Thubut. In the two passages, we see that being subject is the object of knowledge, and there is an interplay between the two aspects. Of course, it recalls us of the famous Quranic verse, "La tudrikul absar wa huwa yudrikul absar." So our vision does not apprehend him, but he is apprehending our vision. And let's see what kind of interplay between the subject and object we find in those two passages. In the face of Nuh, we find something like, whoever imagines that he sees does not know, and whoever knows that he sees himself is the Gnostic. That is how people are divided between knowledgeable and not knowledgeable. In the chapter 360, we find he is the necessary, without thinking, without examination. Know that light perceives, and we perceive by it, whereas darkness is perceived, but we do not perceive by it. So let's see now what we find in the face of Nuh. We find a clear distinction between two epistemological paths, the circular path and the straight path. Ibn Arabi talks about the Muhammadan, the perfected one, and about his reaction to perplexity, actually. So he says, he brought perplexity to them, meaning God, by the enumeration of the one through the aspects and the relations. The Muhammadan says, increase me in perplexity about you. The perplexed is in the circle, and he does not escape from the circular movement around the pole. Whereas the follower of the long-stretched path is bending and going out from his aim, as he is seeking for that in which he already is, but is imagining his aim. They are from him, a from, a towards, and whatever is between them. So we see here that mustatil for me is long stretch in that it goes away from the center and from the subject observing the object. The follower of the circular path, he does not have a beginning that would imply a from, nor a goal to perfect him that would imply a towards. He has the most complete existence, and he was given the comprehensive words and wisdoms. He is drowned in the seas of knowledge of God, which is perplexity. So now that we have seen that circular epistemology in action, let's go back to the chapter 360 and that famous passage on the circle of being. Really brilliantly described in the talk of Stephen, but just to summarize, we have a dot, which is Wujūd, which is al-haq, and that dot is in relation with himself. That relation make a trade between two dots, which is the mumkin, which is the possible thing, and the circumference of the circle is only the limit, the horizon of non-being, because there is nothing outside of Wujūd, and there is nothing outside of the traits that are between the two manifestations of Wujūd. So what is interesting here is that we have a clear description of the nature of the possible things, and so the nature of Thubūt, and a clear relation to the notion of Hayra. So as he says, the beginning of possible things is God, and their end is God, and the whole affair returns to him. This is what should suitably be said, as it is not him, and it is not other than him. Therefore, although being is a unique entity, it is actually made many by the entities of the possible things, so that he is the one many. The possible thing is positively is bad, and so this is one of the discussion I want to propose, is that the fixity of Thubūt, I think, is kind of a wrong understanding of the term. It's more a positive affirmation of something, but we will come back to this. So he says, the possible thing is positively characterized by being and non-being together. It is susceptible to both, just as it is also negatively characterized as non-existent and non-annihilated. It reunites the two in its characterization, that is between positivity and negativity. And here, I think the relation between Isbat and Thubūt should be really taken seriously. This definition needs to be positively affirmed, and it cannot escape it. That is why it is also characterized by perplexity between being and non-being, because it cannot be extricated from one of the two extremities. So what is very interesting here is that in the very same passage, Ibn Arabi again brings the discussion back to the subject-object dialectics. And he says about us being ourselves possible things, he who knows himself in this manner knows his Lord. This is why the lawgiver turns you over to knowledge of yourself in knowledge of God. Through his words, we shall show them our signs, which are the indications, upon the horizons and in themselves. Hence, he did not leave aside anything of the cosmos, for everything of the cosmos that is extraneous from you is the horizons themselves. And here, it's Ayn al-Afaq. We could also translate is the eye of the horizons, the other eye seeing you. And these are your two aspects. This, until it is clear to them that it is the will, nothing else, because there is nothing else. So let's try to summarize what we have so far regarding that notion of Thubūt, regarding the relations, regarding Wujūd as one entity, the multiplicity of the possible things, etc. What I think we should understand is that the first relation, it's a relation of Wujūd to Wujūd. It's the relation of equality. It's Wujūd as Wujūd. But the very notion of relation in itself it's only non-being. It's only a distinction of Wujūd distinguishing himself. So we can understand that the negation of indetermination is necessary to bring the first determination with the affirmation, the positive affirmation of being as what there is. And that relation is actually nothing other than being himself. In the short descriptions that were transcribed by Ibn Sawdakin and edited by Abdul Baqi Meftah, Lawaqi al-Asrar wa Rawayh al-Anwar, we have that interesting remark: non-being is a relative name. It means it has no being. The same with darkness, which has no light, and there is a distinction between darkness and dark. And here we see the same kind of symbolism that he uses to describe Thubūt and the mumkin between darkness and light. So the point is that when we understand that non-being is just the relation of being to himself, then we have the second relation, which are all the possibilities of differentiations starting from that inner relation in Wujūd. Like Ibn Arabi says in the Futuhat, absolute non-being is like a mirror for the absolute being. And absolute being is also like a mirror for absolute non-being, because there is no such thing, of course, as non-being. There is only being. So the possible, the mumkin is the barzakh, the interface between being and non-being. And this is precisely what Ibn Arabi calls the relation of Thubut. So the possible thing is, like Ibn Arabi says himself, the image that appears between the one who sees himself and the mirror. It is neither the one who sees himself nor something else. So neither being nor something else, and neither non-being nor something else. We are again completely in the epistemology and the knowledge by perplexity here. So we should understand, I think, that Thubūt is clearly not something fixed as defined by not in movement. And we will come to this just after, because I think it will be a kind of determination that is not right for that ontological level. In the Kitab al-Isfar and Nata'ij al-Asfar, the books of uncovering the results of the journeys, we find that very important declaration of Ibn Arabi, where he states that since the principle of being is movement, there cannot be any immobility in it, because if it was immobile, it will return to its origin, which is non-existence. So the only fixity is non-existence, actually. Therefore, the journey never stops in the upper or the lower worlds, and the divine realities never cease to travel, going and coming and going. And what is, I think, very, very interesting to remind is that in that book, Ibn Arabi recalls us of three types of journey: the journey from God, and the journey towards God, and the journey in God. And as we saw in the fast of Nuh about the Muhammadan circular path, a journey with a from and with a towards is not a perfect journey. It's not the journey of the Muhammadan. It's the journey in God, which is of course the most perfect journey. And it is described precisely by Ibn Arabi as the journey of wandering and perplexity, which has no end. So now that we have seen all this, I want to finish with the key, actually, the key to understand what is the most perfect tool for bringing perplexity in our experience of being, which is, according to Ibn Arabi, revelation itself, and it's the very aim of the revelation. In the chapter 177, on the station of knowledge, of ma'rifah, we have a very interesting and fascinating section called the science of perfection and imperfection in being. And we have a first declaration, which is, I think, really important to meditate. Know that the existence of imperfection in being is part of its perfection. If it were not, the perfection of being would be lacking by the absence of deficiency or imperfection in it. So after that, Ibn Arabi, I will summarize here what Ibn Arabi describes, that God is perfect in himself. Wujūd, the haq, is perfect in himself, whereas every existent thing, or possible thing, if we want, receives the perfection. So the perfection of God is whatever is suitable for him, but the perfection of the world, of cosmos, he says, is the presence of the human being, whereas the perfection of human being is what he receives from God revelation. So it seems clear at first glance, but then it becomes more interesting. The imperfection of the world is its perfection, because as we have just seen, a perfection that does not welcome or imply imperfection is not perfect. So the manifestation of imperfection in the world, which brings him perfection, is the human being. So human being perfects the world because he is himself imperfect. And the imperfection of the human being is his presence in the world. The perfection, the only true perfection, the perfection of divinity, the perfection of God, is attainable by man only, for Ibn Arabi, through revelation and not through intellects. And we will see why. Because as he says clearly, whatever the intellect sees as perfect, that is itself imperfection to God. So for him, the rational proofs bring us half knowledge of God, which is incomparability, is tanzih, his transcendence, whereas revelation adds reports about God that are exactly what intellect denies by its proofs, and which is his similitude, actually, it's tashbih. So here is Ibn Arabi's description about what actually does the Quran, the revelation in general, to the human being, what it brings in the human experience of being. He addresses the senses and the imagination by his disengagement, to which point the rational proves. The senses listen, so the senses and the imagination are perplexed, and they say, we have nothing of him at our disposal. And he addresses the rational intellects by his similitude, to which point the senses and the imagination. The intellects listen, so the intellect are perplexed, and they say, we have nothing of him at our disposal. He surpasses the perception by the intellect, the senses, and the imagination, and he isolates himself, glory to him, in perfection by perplexity. So no one him but himself, and no one witnesses him but himself. So what is very important here is that the very nature of the Quranic speech is that it affirms both tanzih and tashbih, and that it brings a particular language and a particular symbolic play that mix our perception in order to bring the Hayra, to bring the perplexity. So the intellects are perplexed, and this is the divine perfection. And the human being stays in an intermediary state between perfection of perplexity and definition, and he is the perfection of the world. And here, and I will end by this. I don't know where am I in the timing, but we have for me a summary of what we just saw. The interplay between the subject-object relation, to being and in being, and the role played by the revelation as bringing a perplexity, which is perfecting the human apprehension of being. Know that God is the apparent, which is witnessed by the eyes, and the non-apparent, which is witnessed by the intellect. Just as no object of knowledge is never hidden to him, on the contrary, everything is witnessed by him. In the same manner, he is not hidden to his creatures, whether in their state of non-existence or in their states of existence. On the contrary, he is witnessed by them in the characteristics of appearance and non-appearance, through their discernment and their glances. However, witnessing does not imply that one knows that he is the object if it is not through a divine information. Thank you.